Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the POK Podcast. We have a lot to talk about
Yes.
today. As always, it seems there's quite a bit going on in the news this week. At the time of filming this, it was this week that we had Donald Trump make his executive order to end the practice of separating families at the border. I just want to take a minute to talk about that before we get into our main topics today. As for what our main topics are, we're going to be talking about E3 today.
Mm-hmm.
So last time we had, or maybe not last time, but the time before last, we talked about trying to get a little bit into the more pop culture scene with our podcast.
Right.
And then kind of linking that in with some of the more serious, maybe social and political issues and how the two are connected, how it might affect one, and how one might affect the other.
Mm-hmm.
So we're going to be talking about net neutrality today as well, in addition to the E3 announcements. And then discuss a little bit about how net neutrality rules might actually affect the gaming world and the gaming community, gaming development,
Mm-hmm.
And then kind of give our 2 cents about it. What do we think about it? Was it a good idea? Was it a bad idea? Etc.
Right.
So, and don't forget to subscribe if you're interested in the content, if you're enjoying what we're doing. We appreciate the support if you're already subscribed. Any additional support just makes it easier for us to put out this content, to get it to you guys quicker.
Right. And we love feedback as well. We love
Yeah.
hearing from you guys.
Yes, please comment in the section below about what you think about what we're talking about, what your ideas are, what's going through your head, what your initial reactions are. If you haven't thought about this topic a whole lot before, then maybe what is something that you learned that you didn't know before that really intrigued you?
Right.
So let's start off by talking about the immigration shenanigans that have been going on this week and the week before and the week before that.
Right.
It's been a hot topic for a while now,
Mm-hmm.
and at least on our social media, I've been trying to steer a little bit clear of it, mostly because it is this highly emotionally driven debate
Right.
that is really founded on political principles as opposed to a whole lot of evidence.
Yeah, it seems like it's a lot more about which side are you on than it is about, okay, what's actually happening and what does that mean?
Yeah, so every time I hear people talk about this issue, it seems like they already have their mind made up as to what the solution is,
Mm-hmm.
or that it's something we should leave alone altogether.
Right.
But I think most people agree that our immigration policy is just completely trash. It's garbage.
Mm-hmm.
No matter which way you look at it, somebody suffers, and it's not a well-oiled machine whatsoever.
Absolutely not.
And so, I'm sure everyone's watching this at this point has heard about the zero tolerance policy that was announced by Jeff Sessions a while back. And one of the policy itself, again, we had this same issue with the NFL policy about banning kneeling, right? It's not the policy itself is this messed up, completely irrational idea.
Mm-hmm.
It's the way it was implemented, the lack of follow through on what to do with children whose parents were prosecuted, that created all these problems that were. We'll give the Jeff Sessions the benefit of the doubt and say that this was not the intended consequence
Right.
of what his policy was trying to do. And so, for me, and tell me what you think, Jordan.
Of course.
I feel like we went into this policy with a lot of fault. I don't even want to say fault. I don't even want to sugarcoat it. We've just been handed a lot of false information around what actually are the consequences of immigration, at least from the White House. And then on the opposite end, major media outlets have very much condemned the White House for their policies.
Yeah.
And no one has really come up with a solid solution yet, it doesn't seem like. And every time I hear someone talk about this, I just feel like we don't know enough about this to really figure out a way to fix it.
I think that the White House has done a really good job of demonizing immigrants when I I believe that the majority of people trying to come into this country are not these, murderous gangbangers that they're making them out to be.
Yeah, and that's part of my problem, right? Is that if there was any significant evidence to say that immigrants were more likely to commit violent crimes or that they were more likely to traffic drugs, if they were more likely to commit human trafficking, then I would say, or acts of terror,
Right.
I would say, yeah, you would have a stronger rationale, especially if that difference was significant, which is what Donald Trump recently came out with a statement citing a vastly exaggerated homicide rate committed by immigrants. And just to put in perspective for you guys, immigrants make up a total of 3% of the population. It's not a very big chunk of the population. And the likelihood of them committing violent crimes is no more or less empirically than an American citizen. So I don't buy, I think the argument that we should reduce immigration and create harsh deterrents for that's particularly illegal immigration, on the basis that they are bringing in human traffickers and drug smuggling and murderers, I think that's a weak argument. I think the much better argument, if you wanted to go that route, if you wanted to make a case for why we should reduce immigration, is to say the short-term economic consequences are too much.
Yeah.
You can make a much better case by saying that because there's some actual evidence to suggest that you might be onto something there, right? If you were to say, okay, on average, each immigrant and the or first-generation immigrant over the course of their lifetime will cost us thousands of dollars, there's evidence to say that, yeah, that's a problem, right? So if you wanted to make that the centerpiece of your argument, at least on the economic standpoint, I would say, okay, you have a point.
I get it, yeah.
I don't necessarily agree that that's where we should be basing our solutions off of for immigration, but I think that's a stronger case. And it's frustrating, especially even on social media, because you see all these. Just recently, I got into it with somebody on Facebook. They had posted a meme about this U.S. sergeant who beat these two immigrants to death because he thought that they raped his daughter. And
there was no evidence to support that any of that happened.
The guy didn't even exist, the U.S. sergeant. It was just some story that said, okay, that the symbolism, the subliminal message was that immigrants are rapists, or at the very least, they're more likely to be rapists, and that we are completely justified in harsh treatment of them for their crimes.
Well, I mean, I think you said it best when you got into this debate with this person, is that if this did happen, then, shame on those people that committed the act and so on and so forth. But when you post things online especially about immigrants, with what's going on in America right now, that casts a negative light on immigrants, and there is no evidence to suggest that one had ever happened or that these people exist, you are perpetuating this idea that immigrants are bad and creating this blanket statement saying, oh, well, this is what immigrants do. And that's just, it's so toxic, and it makes me so frustrated.
Yeah, I think we might need to do a podcast episode on this and just kind of delve into it and get the numbers straight and come up with some cohesive arguments for why we need stronger immigration policies, and maybe some reasons why we need to figure out ways to make legal immigration easier. I don't know. We'll have to plan it out, but we don't want to spend too much time on Immigration Day because we have some more fun things that we want to talk about.
Yay!
And we still want to spend too much time on the sad stuff here. We have plenty more of that to come.
We'll do more sad stuff later, but not right now.
So E3 happened recently.
Yup.
And there was quite a few games that were released or that were announced that I am particularly hyped for. And so we're going to really just cover the ones that we are excited for, as opposed to going over just all the big announcements, because there's just so many and we'd be here forever talking about it.
Right.
And I want to get to how this gaming is affected by net neutrality as
Mm-hmm.
well. So for the sake of time, we're just going to give our highlights and what we really liked.
Yep.
So the first one that we wanted to talk about, we're both pretty hyped for. So I'm a little bit more of a gamer than Jordan is.
So here you go. Here's a little reference point for you guys. My favorite video game is Little Big Planet, and I crush that Little Big Planet. But it's not available on the Xbox or PC, so I don't get to play it that much. But that's about the extent of my video gaming abilities.
Yeah, I have a little bit more of a diverse gaming interest. I've recently gotten her into some games, so maybe some of these will.
Yeah, we played Borderlands 2 all the way through recently, and that was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that.
Yeah. So what I'm excited about with the C3 is that we're getting some split screen games that we can actually play.
Yeah, co-op games
that are far less like intense and just more like laid back, casual split screen
things
gaming.
I won't epically fail
to
at.
the good old days. So the first on the list is Super Smash Brothers.
Yeah.
Super Smash Brothers Ultimate. It's coming to the Nintendo Switch. The release date is December 7th. So one of the things about this game that they were really emphasizing is that you'll have access to every character in the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
And so we'll put a link in the description if you guys are interested in the giant character list that this game will have. But yeah, split screen, that's one of the, or not even split screen, it's single screen, right? So many fans of the series were wondering if this game would be an extension of the Wii U game released 4 years ago. So some good news on that front. If you want fresh content, this is going to be a good game for you. It is a completely new game in the series. Will feature entirely new game modes. And what was most impressive to me was how the game looked. So not the functionality
really
of it, but just the aesthetics of it. It looked super clean.
Yeah.
Keep in mind, this is going to be on the Nintendo Switch, and we've already played a couple Switch games.
Yeah, so short review on the Nintendo Switch. My best friend Dorothy has a Switch that she always brings over when she comes to visit, and we love it. We play Mario Kart and like switch off between like who won which round, and we have a wonderful time with it. So
it's just a great system of fun casual gaming without
well, and we had talked about for a while getting a GameCube so that we could play like some of these like more party style games with our friends. But then when Dorothy got the Switch, we were like, oh well, we could probably just get this and do kind of the same thing with the Super Smash Brothers and Mario Kart and that
Speaking
kind of
of GameCube, this game will be compatible with GameCube controllers. So if you're like me and you've played...
He does not like the Switch controller.
If you've played on console controllers like Xbox or PlayStation, the Nintendo Switch controller is probably not going to be your cup of tea.
Yeah, I mean, it's like 3 inches by 1.5 inches. It's tiny.
Right, so I was a big fan of the GameCube controller. And
it's got those long things on the side, right? So you know how the Xbox kind of has these, the GameCube had like really long ones, the old ones.
You mean like the hand grips?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I wasn't sure where she was going with that.
It was a big controller. It was a very big controller, from what I remember.
Yeah, I mean it was a well laid out controller in my mind.
Fair enough.
And fairly optimal for a game like Super Smash Brothers. And you will still have that ability.
Word.
This game alone is probably worth buying a Switch for, to be honest. Like,
we're gonna wait till Black Friday and see how much they cost, and then probably buy one.
Yeah, and so the last thing I want to say about this game is that you will have a story mode for this game. We don't really know what it will be called. In Super Smash Bros. Melee, it was called Adventure Mode. In Brawl, it was called Subspace Emissary. Those are huge core features of that game, of those games, and I think fans would be really disappointed if something like that wasn't present in this game. So it's pretty much a guarantee it's going to be there. So stay tuned to see what comes out with that game. Check in on updates. And now something a little bit more up my alley is that we got some new information about another Halo game coming out.
Yeah.
So this game is going to be called Halo Infinite. We don't really have a release date for it yet. And we don't really know a whole lot about it. We'll find out later. That's kind of what happened with the new Elder Scrolls teaser, is that we were just kind of given a teaser with this. We don't really know what it's going to be about. We don't really know the story too much. We do know that it's going to be centered on Master Chief.
Mm-hmm.
We do know that there was a reason it wasn't called Halo 6. This game is very much going to be a fresh start.
Mm.
So the way that Microsoft has pitched it is that this is taking the Halo series in a new and very different direction,
Right.
Which I'm excited for. It's supposed to be friendly to people that haven't played the series before, so you can just kind of jump right in. You don't really need to know a whole lot of backstory to really appreciate it.
My extent of Halo knowledge is red versus blue. That's all I know about Halo.
Yeah. So you'd be able to come into this game and still enjoy it, assuming that you enjoyed first-person shooters at all. So probably not. Probably just for me. This is just my treat. But arguably the most interesting news coming from Microsoft on this particular game is that they have a new game engine called Slipspace.
Okay. What does that mean?
It's just the name of the game engine. So it's the system that the game is running on.
Okay.
We saw a brief demonstration of it at E3. We saw a teaser trailer, and it looked really pretty.
I mean, I gotta be honest, most of the games that are coming out now are gorgeous. I think we're to a point now with game development where everything is just beautiful. And it's going to keep getting beautiful until our eyes can't realize what it looks like anymore.
Yeah. And for those of you who are Xbox fans and loyal to Xbox, this game will be on the PC and the Xbox. We don't know yet if it will be exclusive to those two, but probably.
Mm-hmm.
And then, like I mentioned before, we got a teaser for Elder Scrolls 6. So some good news and some bad news. The good news is that we know we're going to get it. The bad news is we don't really know much else. So part of what Bethesda is going through right now is they have a bunch of games coming out.
Mm-hmm.
They have their own new entirely solo franchise coming out. So it's not Fallout or Elder Scrolls or anything like that. I think it's called Starlight or something like that.
Okay.
Starfield, that's what it's called. It's a new original title. Todd Howard talked about it at E3. It looks like it's going to have some potential, but the bad news is that Bethesda's going to be focusing on its new original title and the new Fallout game before they even pay attention to Elder Scrolls 6. So you could be getting this in 2020, maybe 2021.
They just wanted to let y'all know that eventually it's coming.
Yeah, don't expect it in 2018 for sure. Don't expect it in 2019 either. 2020 would be the most optimistic release date, but I would probably lean more towards 2021.
Right.
These games take a while to make. And then back to something that we can both enjoy. Super Mario Party. We're getting another one. Yeah. So to start, you're going to have all the classic characters, including some of the new ones. Games. There's some good news about that, too. Dry Bones is going to be in the game. Goomba is going to be in the game. Similar to the previous games, it's a board map, and you have all these different mini games that you can play. Again, this is probably just most exciting for us because we're looking forward to having another game that we can play together on the couch.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the issues that I've had with the recent trends in gaming development is that they tend to lean towards an online multiplayer,
right,
versus like the couch potato games that know, I grew up on. And I still think that you can make plenty of those, sit in front of the couch and play on one screen games.
Well, even just make it an option. Like, I totally understand why they're leaning in so hard to online gaming and that sort of multiplayer thing. But I don't understand why they can't just make, split screen an option for some of these games.
So this game is on the Nintendo Switch, what I mentioned before. The release date is October 5th.
Mm-hmm.
So some interesting features with this game. So one of the ones that I think is really interesting is that for some of the mini games, you'll actually be able to play on two different Switch screens if you wanted. So you have the option to do that. So it's kind of like in reverse. Instead of having the option to play on one screen, you now have the additional option of being able to play on two if you wanted, as opposed to the other way around.
Right.
So for some of the mini games, you will have the ability to use the two Switch consoles, and you're going to be getting all your favorite types of mini games back. My personal favorite were the ones where you mash buttons as fast as you possibly can.
I love puzzle games. I love them.
So we're going to be getting some of those. The real downer to this, and this is where I don't know if we'll get this right away.
Okay.
Is that you're going to be looking at a $60 price tag for this game.
That's what most games cost, though, right? I mean, I don't know what the games cost for the Switch, but
yeah, I mean, for me though, it's like I would pay $60 for Super Smash Brothers Infinite or Ultimate, whatever it's called. I don't know if I'd dump $60 into a Mario Party game that I would only play when we had like 3 or 4 people.
Well, you know, I don't buy anything unless it's on sale. I will find a sale price.
We're never going to be paying $60 for this game.
Not once. We're going to find a sale price. I think I paid $30 for Wolfenstein 2 at Christmas instead of the 60.
Yeah.
I love deals.
But if I had to choose between the two, it's a no-brainer. I'd go with, I'd dump my money into Super Smash Brothers before I dumped it into Mario Party. But I do love the Mario Party games. It's a lot of fun when you have friends over.
Which we do a lot.
Yeah, so it's just a nice casual game. Next up on the list is a game that I have some opinions about.
Oh.
So Assassin's Creed Odyssey.
Right.
So for those of you who haven't played Assassin's Creed Origins because you were worried it's going to be another typical repetitive Assassin's Creed game, it was actually kind of a fresh start for the series.
Yeah.
They went the RPG route. So you had the looting, you had this probably a little bit more in-depth story, you had character customization, you had skill trees.
When I watched you play Assassin's Creed Origin, and for me, I just thought it was a beautiful game.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time in college with art and architecture of ancient Egypt, and like I was pretty blown away with the job that they did with designing the game.
Yeah, so it was very much in its infant stage, I feel like, as far as being a solid, well-rounded RPG, right? So the missions got super repetitive, which just basically turned into another Assassin's Creed game after a while.
Finest dude, save him.
Combat system was far from being well polished. And there was a couple instances where even some of the ways that combat went down, it like just took me completely out of the immersive experience because like you had people climbing up and down buildings that made no sense for them to do.
So you would say that it was fun for a little bit, but the novelty kind of wore off.
Yeah, I'm happy this is where Assassin's Creed is going.
The direction they're going.
Yeah. Yes, I think this is a game that would be best suited for an RPG style.
Okay.
But the good news is that this game looks like it's going to be taking all the good parts of Origins and then making the RPG elements better.
Okay.
So I'm optimistic for this because it's basically if Ubisoft and what's that other company that made Dragon Age?
Oh. I was thinking Bethesda, but Bethesda didn't make Dragon.
No, thought I had it written down here.
Okay, Google it. Let's see. Okay. No, all right, maybe not.
BioWare, that's what it is.
Wow.
So it's like if BioWare and Ubisoft had a baby.
Okay.
That's what it looks like on first glance.
Okay.
So, and I'm optimistic for it. There's a lot of cool moments just in the trailer alone. Takes place in ancient Greece. So the war between Athens and Sparta is going to be a core element to it. You're going to get all these historical characters, including Socrates.
Right.
That'll be interesting. You're getting dialogue options. That's another cool thing you're getting with this game. So in a lot of these newer big-time RPGs, dialogue options is a huge part of it.
Right.
But this is completely new territory for Ubisoft.
Right.
And it could be a hit or a miss.
You just kind of have to wait and see.
We'll just kind of have to wait and see. Ship combat is going to be another emphasis of this game. So one of the things that you actually seemed to enjoy in the last one.
The ship combat was pretty cool.
And in this game, you'll be able to have your own ship that you can customize and upgrade, and that'll be fun.
Yeah, I keep debating on buying that pirate game. I can never remember what it's
Sea of
called.
Thieves.
Sea of Thieves, because I think being a pirate sounds like fun.
Yeah, and so yeah, and then this game is pretty much combining Assassin's Creed Black Flag in a lot of ways,
Mm-hmm.
where you essentially were a pirate, and Assassin's Creed Origins.
Mm-hmm.
So it's looking like we're going to get a more full-fledged, more well-polished RPG. I'm excited for that. I'm an RPG player. That's what I like to do.
It's his favorite.
I'm not a huge fan of online games. They turn me into a terrible person.
Well, it turns most people into a terrible person. You were, like you said the other day, the most toxic community online is League players.
Oh my gosh. Don't even get me started. Don't even get me started. I'll get too mad. I'll say something I'll regret. I'll get judged. Let's see here. The graphics look amazing. You'll be able to kick people off cliffs now.
Ooh!
So if you
said you could do this as Sparta, right?
Yeah. So if you watch 300 and you saw Leonidas kick that dude into the pit and be like, "This is Sparta,"
you can do this.
You can do that now. So that's going to be like worth $60 in itself, right? So
I'll pay $60 to kick somebody off the cliff.
And it looked real pretty while doing it. Absolutely. So we'll just have to kind of wait and see what happens with this game. We should be getting a release date in October, so that's relatively
soon. Yeah,
soon.
I mean that's 3-4 months away.
Yeah.
October's my favorite month.
Yeah. Now on to a game that I'm conflicted on, but tell me what you guys think, because
You're conflicted on this one?
Fallout 76. Yes.
You love Fallout.
Yes, I do. And then Bethesda said, you know what? We're going to make an entirely online game.
Oh, yeah.
What? Why? It makes sense, though. The money's in the online industries.
Mm-hmm.
This game either has the potential to be something groundbreaking, or it can just be another Elder Scrolls Online that really didn't make the cut for an MMO.
But you've been playing Fallout 4 for, a couple of years now.
Yeah, Fallout 4 is a great game, and Fallout 76.
The design in Fallout 4 is really impressive. I like what they did with that.
And Fallout 76, they're bringing the same game engine in. It's
Mm-hmm.
The graphics are it's basically like playing Fallout 4 but online,
Okay.
with a little bit,
So it's
graphics.
still the like 50s futuristic post-apocalypse style.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So where to even begin with this? So because it's an online game, this might be something that would be susceptible to having some extra drama behind the net with the net neutrality rules.
Yeah.
So not this game specifically, but just online games in general. So we'll get to that when we get into the net neutrality talks, because there's quite a bit to kind of figure out.
Right.
And we'll definitely need you guys to comment and give us your thoughts, because it's something that we don't even completely understand yet. There's no NPCs in this game. There's no traders that you can just find walking around. There's no quest givers that are human NPCs. It's all robots and holotapes that you get your quests on.
Right.
There's PvP, something that's completely new to the Fallout series. No idea how I feel about that, because the Fallout at its heart was an RPG, right? The combat felt like a clunky RPG game.
Right.
It didn't feel like a first-person shooter, and it wasn't really supposed to, in my mind. There's just too much you could do with the game for it to try and run like a smooth first-person shooter and not have a bunch of loading screens.
It sounds like it sounds like that it's one of those things that you're just gonna have to play, and you're either gonna really enjoy what they did or not.
Well, the good news is we're getting a beta for the game, so the beta will be coming out this year. And so they're gonna test this. This game could be entirely different by the time it gets released.
Right.
And that I like. So I'll be able to watch some streamers play and see what it looks like.
Mm-hmm.
And apparently, you will be able to play the game solo if that's really the case. And my game, I'll do that. And I don't even necessarily dislike the online bit. I just wish PvP wasn't a part of it.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that RPGs like this need a PvP element to it unless it's a cooperative type of thing,
right? Like
what Mass Effect had done, but do that way better. Yeah, so I don't know. I'm still iffy on it.
That's all right.
Let's see here. No NPCs, PvP. I'm a big Fallout fan, so this whole going online thing was a big surprise to me. I put hundreds of
He
hours.
loves Fallout.
Yeah, and this is still going to be a RPG at heart, not a first-person shooter. So
we shall see. We shall see.
No official release date for it yet, but the beta will be coming sometime this year, most likely.
Last but not least, though.
Oh,
this game looks beautiful.
So if any of you were fans of the Witcher series,
and just so y'all all know, I have never seen anyone play a video game as much as Dylan played Witcher. He loved that game.
I'm biased. I think it's the best game of all time. But so CD Projekt Red is the developer of this game. So Cyberpunk 2077.
Cyberpunk 2077.
Cyberpunk 2077.
Yeah.
Is a massive futuristic. I don't know what.
Is it an RPG?
Yes, it is an RPG.
Okay.
This is going to actually be what happens when you do an RPG in a first-person shooter game correctly, most likely.
Oh, okay.
So if you think about Borderlands was an RPG.
Yes.
Sort of. It was more just like a fun kind of RPG because you can loot and do things like that. But,
right.
For the most part, it was a first-person shooter game. That's what you're getting with this. Is you're actually going to be playing as the character V, who is a cyberpunk. Just means that she has biomechanical augments that give the character special abilities, special skills. It is going to be open world. It's going to be massive. It takes place in a huge city. You'll be able to drive vehicles. Character customization is significantly more than in what you got in Witcher. With Witcher, you had a character that was already established by the novels and the previous game, so you couldn't really it wouldn't make sense to change his face structure or anything like that.
Right.
But in this game, you're also not going to be able to change the face structure of your facial structure of your character. You will be able to edit hairstyles. You will be able to edit tattoos, and of course, you'll be able to play around with different
body mods, augments. That's what they're called.
Yeah, so that's going to be a lot of fun. And the depth to which this game looks like it's going to reach is insane. So you know how with Witcher you had these really in-depth storylines, side missions that had real really, well-constructed dialogue. Dialogue will be taking place in real time in this game. So you don't have these awkward pauses. And if you do have these awkward pauses, characters will react to you accordingly. And the dialogue options, you'll be able to pick from a selection of them, and each will have its own different consequences. Something interesting is that in The Witcher, so when you had a dialogue option, in some cases you had the option to lie.
Right.
In this game, an interesting feature of the world is that humans are now hackable because of all these body augments.
Right.
And so you can essentially have your brain hacked into, and if that happens and you lie, whoever's interviewing you or interrogating you will know it.
Gosh, it's scary.
So it raises some really interesting ethical questions as well as to whether or not augmenting yourself is actually tearing away your humanity. Interesting question for you guys to answer too. I don't know.
Well, and just from what you've told me about this game, it sounds like they're really challenging a lot of the standards as far as making a video game, especially with the whole, the thing you were telling me about sexuality within the game and, class as far as, your body mods can dictate how people react and interact with you. And
you're able to romance characters in this game. The main character can be whatever sexuality you want. Which is something that wasn't the case in Witcher, if you remember, because the sexuality and the just overall personality of the character had already been developed. The character already knew his preferences.
Right.
In this game, you really have more free will over that.
There's a lot of free will.
You can really do what you want.
Yeah.
And each of those decisions will affect how the NPCs of the game will interact with you, and that's really cool. So every decision you make actually has a consequence as opposed to some of them just kind of being more customizable personal preference things. Another thing is that they're introducing a fun little stat in the game called your cool stat. So this is your street cred.
Oh, I would have hella good street
Yeah, totally.
cred.
Yeah, so the cool stat basically, well, it's like your charisma in the game. If you play D&D, it's how well do you talk to people? How influential are you?
Right.
And it's the same function here. It will open up new dialogue options if you have enough cool points when talking to certain NPCs. Could change the direction of the story. We don't really know a whole lot about it. As far as the customization, the customization that you can play around with the augments is pretty extensive from what we understand. So they had a closed door demo, meaning that just a few lucky guests got to actually go and see it. But from what we understand, there's a huge amount of augments, weapons, skills. There's tons of ways that you can play this game, and that's what I really, really like. You can be this cyberpunk ninja assassin, or you can just be this big tank that just shoots homing rounds at everybody.
Right.
You have so many options. And I like that because that means the replay value of this game is going to be fantastic.
You're going to get your money's worth.
Oh, absolutely. They've already come out and said that they don't have microtransactions in this game. CD Projekt Red never does anything like that if they can avoid it. They really kind of just... They're more of like the artists of the gaming industry. They straight up tell you the game will be done when it's done, whenever that is.
And I mean, you've told me more than once they took 10 years to make the Witcher game, but it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. So absolutely worth.
There have already been predictions made that this will be the best game of our generation. So that's a pretty high standard or pretty high prediction. So we'll see where that comes in. But those are our E3 highlights. Let us know what games you were excited for. There was plenty of other games that were announced that were definitely big mentions, like Anthem, for example. But being an online game, you can see why it might not be our cup of tea, but it might be yours, and that's awesome. But just let us know what you're excited for. And
so let's hop in. Okay.
Yeah, now we're going to head into the nitty gritty. And we're going to talk about net neutrality. One of the reasons that we want to talk about this in combination with E3 is that a lot of the new games are going to be online. And with the net neutrality rules imposed by the FCC being removed, it opens the gates for businesses and particularly gaming distributors to function very differently. And that can have some impact on you guys.
Oh, absolutely.
Especially if you play video games, or if you're like Jordan here, who works entirely, or me, who works entirely online.
Or if you're a streamer.
All these things can be impacted by net neutrality, and we'll discuss a little bit how that will take place. So
let's start with what is net neutrality.
What in the world is this thing? So this is one of those things that I feel like everyone has heard about, but most people are like, I don't really have a clear grasp of it. I just heard that most people like it.
Yes.
So the principle of net neutrality is, very simply put, is that the internet service providers, or the ISPs, treat all data on the internet the same and cannot discriminate or charge different rates by user, content, website, platform, application, or method of communication.
Right.
So, in short, when that bit about can't charge different rates by user, it just means that if you charge one person for a specific level of internet access, you can't charge anyone else differently for that same service.
Right.
So you can still change your prices, but you can't show preferential treatment.
Right. So if one person is paying $30 for 100 megabytes per second, you can't charge someone else $50 for the same internet speed.
Right. So in 2015, the Federal Communications Commission, so that's the FCC, issued this open internet order. This was the birth of an actual law that protected net neutrality. So to preface this, Congress had been working for years to try and get net neutrality laws passed, but always ran into lobbyist groups, and there's a lot of money.
Special interests, yeah.
Special interests. And at the end of the day, it's still a regulation, and that's like a curse word to a lot of people on the right and Republican ideologies.
Well, heaven forbid, right?
Well, and we'll talk about that because some regulations aren't good. Some regulations, and depending on the service, can be necessary. And we'll talk a little bit about whether or not that's the case here. So as of December 14th, 2017,
2077. Yeah, we're in the future.
The FCC, under the leadership of he's a Trump-appointed official to the head of the FCC, they put forth a vote to repeal net neutrality rules, and they got it repealed 3-2.
Mm-hmm. And they reclassified it as an information service.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. So before, when the Open Internet Order happened in 2015, it viewed the internet as being a utility.
Right.
And if it's a utility, the government has a lot more power to intervene on the behalf of the consumer to make sure they're being treated fairly, that companies aren't abusing this utility.
So it was viewed as the same as like power or water.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Utility. All right.
Yeah. And utility companies can't discriminate for that utility.
Right.
So it's now an information service, and as of last month, that went into effect.
Okay.
So today we're going to discuss the possible implications of that decision, what are the arguments against net neutrality, what are the arguments for net neutrality, what evidence is there for these arguments, and how this might affect the gaming world. So we'll talk a little bit about that. So first off, let's talk a little bit about who doesn't like net neutrality. So it should come really as no surprise that it's the internet service providers, right? So the people that control that thing don't like it when it's regulated.
Because they lose money, potentially.
Hypothetically.
Yeah.
Broadband and telecommunication companies don't like it. Computer hardware manufacturers, and there are several economists that are like, yeah, net neutrality is a bad thing. So one of their big arguments, and there's a lot of arguments, we're going to really just cover like the two huge ones, the meat of their arguments that they're really pushing through. And one of the biggest ones is that net neutrality hurts in investment.
Okay.
Because their rationale is that why would we as an internet service provider invest in an area when we can't charge the companies that are in that area extra for that service? And if we don't, we're not guaranteed to actually get back on our investment for investing in that area, right? So say, like, for example, we live in Boone, right? So and we only really have one service provider, and we'll get into why that's an issue. There's very little incentive for say Comcast to roll up in Boone and try and set up shop, because why would they want to be competitive with another huge ISP?
Right.
Doesn't make any sense. And it's not like there's a bunch of business here that would make use of it, of a really high-speed premium service like that. But that has nothing to do with whether or not you can charge a company more. So I'm a little bit skeptical of this reason for being a argument against net neutrality, especially because no big internet service provider after net neutrality was passed in 2015 came out and said, we're changing our investment strategy. Didn't happen. And that's one of the biggest I think counterpoints to this particular claim, is that it didn't really change much when the laws were in place.
Right.
So, and what it seems to be, at least on paper, and if you guys know more about this stuff than I do, please fill in the details, because I am simplifying it, I'm sure. To me, it seems like the location itself of where you planning on investing is the ultimate determinant as to whether or not you're going to do it, right? So no one would want to, no ISP would make a profit coming to Boone and competing with Spectrum, right?
Yeah, so where we live at in Boone, there is Charter Spectrum, and then there's like two much smaller companies that are excessively more expensive that service like people that are way out in the boondocks kind of thing. Yeah. But we're close enough to town that we can use Charter Spectrum, and we get up to 200 megabytes. So, it's good internet, and it's affordable internet. So it wouldn't make sense for another company to come in and try and compete with already an established service that is both affordable and reliable.
Yeah, and then FCC Director Ajit Pai, one of his kind of additives to this claim, right, is that the more you regulate something, the less of that product you actually get.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think that that's necessarily true. I think that's an oversimplification of it.
Right.
So just because a regulation says that you can't discriminate between who you sell it to based on prices, doesn't mean that you all of a sudden have to sell less of it or that
Right.
you're incentivized to sell less of it, right? It just means you can't monopolize a certain service. So I don't buy the argument also that somehow any regulation means you get less of that particular service.
No.
That's not necessarily true. It depends on the regulation, and it depends what it requires companies to uphold.
Mm-hmm.
So if it holds them to this ridiculously high standard of their service, so if, for example, if the government has kind of made a standard about what is considered high-speed internet.
Okay.
I can't remember it off the top of my head. Sorry. Or what that number was. But more or less, what you're getting at with by putting a regulation on net neutrality is if you said, okay, we're going to make that standard super high.
Okay.
So you have to provide 150 megabytes per second in order for it to be considered high-speed internet service and actually sell it, right? Mm-hmm. Then the prices would skyrocket because all these companies now have a new standard of the product they have to provide,
right?
When not everyone needs that,
right?
So it would be hurting their business because less people could afford it,
mm-hmm.
right? So I understand not having regulations like that, and net neutrality rules were far from perfect, and we'll get a little bit more into that. But another big argument for why the FCC needed to repeal net neutrality rules is because the companies were doing just fine without it.
Right.
So I have some issues with this one as well.
Okay.
I'm sure you can probably tell where I'm at on the issue right now. But I generally I didn't see the rationale in it.
Okay.
And again, let me know what you guys think. Give me some more clarity on this,
mm-hmm.
because maybe it just doesn't make sense to me. And so the other argument was that it worked just fine, right? Without the rules, that these businesses were growing. And if you look at the numbers about these companies' growth prior to 2015, you'd be like, oh, yeah, well, they had a lot of growth then. So clearly we didn't need the rules. Well, it's not really just about growth. And it's not as if that the internet wasn't really operating under net neutrality rules to begin with.
Right.
So in general, companies had operated under these net neutrality rules and not discriminating their services based on who they prioritized. And we'll get into some of the strategies that they do to engage in kind of these sketchy practices. But the
mm-hmm.
devil's really in the details, because it's not like just because the law wasn't there saying the government could intervene and say, no, you can't do that.
Okay.
There were several lawsuits filed against some of these companies for doing the very thing that net neutrality rules protected against. And in retrospect, if the net neutrality rules were in place, the lawsuits probably would have never taken place. Okay. So, for example, Comcast and AT&T have been sued multiple times, such as imposing secret caps on data, hidden fees, giving technical advantages to their own services over competitors, which is something that we'll see a little bit more of. All of which, in retrospect, would never have been allowed under net neutrality rules. So by repealing net neutrality, you can make a case that you're opening up the gates for companies to do this thing. But I think ultimately it's a matter of trust. Our government is not very trustworthy to most people right now.
Mm-hmm.
And almost equally so, if not more, corporations are not very trustworthy to most people.
Mm-hmm.
So it's really just this, who do you trust more? Do you trust the corporations to make the rules that are best serve the consumer? I don't know. My personal bias is that I typically think big corporations will always prioritize their bottom line. How much money, how much profit are they making?
Right.
And if that means they can take advantage of the consumers, they might, or they probably will in my mind, but I could be wrong. And on the other hand, I think having as few regulations on businesses as possible is probably a good thing, gives businesses more room for innovation and coming up with new ideas. But at the same time, I think there are absolutely some rules that are necessary for a government to be able to enforce on some of these corporations, such that they don't become too powerful.
Well, I mean, here's the reality: places like with high populations, like Charlotte or Atlanta or New York or LA, they're not going to be affected by net neutrality. There's too many providers. There's too much competition. They're going to continue to compete with the other services in their area to be the most affordable for the highest speed internet and for the best websites, if you will. The issue is like places where we live, where there is only one solid internet provider. They can decide to raise their prices or drop their internet speeds,
or just offer a ridiculously tiered service where you can pay thousands of dollars and we'll give you the same internet you have now. I mean, this is a huge exaggeration.
Right, but the point being that net neutrality is really going to affect places where there is a more or less monopoly on the service, on the internet service, because no one's going to spend the money on the infrastructure to come in and compete with Spectrum, not for the population that's here, and like in many other places in the country. So the real concern is that it's going to give power to regions where there's only one internet provider and they're allowed to do whatever they want.
And FCC had made a claim, I think this is also at GPUN, had said something like 90% or 90+% of Americans have multiple choices for service providers. And I don't know about
that seems awful high.
I don't know about you guys. I've lived in Charlotte. I've lived in Raleigh. I've lived in Boone now.
Yeah, even when we lived in Charlotte, we only had one choice.
Well, here's the thing. Here's what ends up happening, right, is that if you live in an apartment complex, that apartment complex will cut a deal with an internet service provider and say, hey, if you offer this internet at a discounted rate to all of our residents, we will promise you that we won't let any of your competitors come and give their service here.
Right. Because the last place we lived, we could get service from AT&T and Spectrum, but the building would only let us get it through Time Warner. And Time Warner was some garbage.
Yep.
I got in so many fights with their customer service.
So when this idea that internet that somehow people have a bunch of choice over their internet service provider
is false.
It's just blatantly wrong. Not in reality. Like that's just it's not true.
That's not the way it works.
Like when we came to Boone, we had one solid.
Yeah, I think
option.
there's one called like Sky Best. It's like $100 some a month, and that's not happening.
Yeah, like they're not true competitors. And one of the things that one of the arguments against net neutrality is that it made these smaller companies have a harder time of competing, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But their argument was that because they're also being taxed a lot, that these smaller companies would have to charge ridiculously high rates and they wouldn't be able to sustain themselves.
Right.
But that one component of net neutrality laws could be fixed. It didn't need to be repealed, is what I would argue. But it's gone now, so we'll see.
Right.
But let's talk about like what are some of the good reasons that net neutrality should be around. And so for each of the critiques about net neutrality, there was pretty much either there wasn't enough evidence to actually support what that critique was, or there was evidence to the complete contrary of what was happening.
Right.
And so that's why I was kind of iffy on it. And I really do try and find and present the argument in the best light possible, because I feel like that's the absolute best way to have a conversation about what the pros and cons of something are.
Of course.
And this one was just really hard for me to do because it's just on paper it didn't make a whole lot of sense. And granted, I'm not super tech savvy, so maybe those who know a little bit more about the way the internet works could chip in on this. But
from a common sense standpoint,
just on paper it doesn't make sense, and especially since public opinion was very much for net neutrality, and that's why it was put into place in the first place in 2015.
Right.
But that aside, what are the reasons for net neutrality? One of them is that it would increase innovation.
Right.
right? So the idea is that all these ISPs are operating on a level playing field, meaning they all have to play by the same rules.
Mm-hmm.
They can't show preferential treatment. They can't block out competitors. They don't do the zero rating bit where they only give their services data-free privileges,
Mm-hmm.
right? None of that. So all these companies are on an even playing field. And you could argue that that's really good for innovation, right? Because a small company, like take Apple, for example, when it first came up, right?
Right.
It started in a garage,
mm-hmm.
right? The innovation drove them to being the super company that they are today. And that's the same reasoning behind why you would want to keep the net neutrality laws, is that if the rules are the same, anyone with a good idea, any small company, if their idea is genius, it's going to make a lot of money.
Right. It's like, so let's say Netflix, right?
Mm-hmm.
Netflix is a gigantic company, and without net neutrality, there's a high potential that Netflix could get preferential treatment. However, with net neutrality, someone could come up with a completely different streaming platform that they felt was more, advanced and more innovative than Netflix, and they would get the same amount of upload, download, attention speed as Netflix. But without net neutrality, the internet provider can say, all right, well, we're going to give Netflix preferential treatment. It's going to load way faster.
It's going to be on the fast line.
Yeah, it's going to download way faster. And this new startup that may be better is probably going to tank because its upload download speed it is ignored. It's not in the fast lane.
Yeah, so you can prioritize certain services that you as the ISP like, while either blocking out another service or a competing service altogether,
mm-hmm.
or just having it run on a really low bandwidth. So
right.
you're on the slow lane, while
just continually spinning that whole circle.
Exactly, and so there's the potential for that to happen. So let's be very clear here.
This has not happened yet.
All of this is hypothetical,
right?
And it's perfectly possible that businesses will, and I think this is actually going to happen relatively soon, where at least in the first year or so of net neutrality being repealed, businesses are going to be on their best behavior.
Oh, absolutely.
They're going to be like, oh, here's all these deals.
Well, everyone's watching them.
Yeah, and at the second they do something bad, or they do something that's a little bit sketchy, net neutrality rules are going to come rolling right back in.
But we just got a thing in the mail from Spectrum saying that they had upped our megabytes per second to 200 instead of 100, and that it wasn't going to cost anything else, and it was just them providing their best customer service possible. And I was like, all right, thanks, but what's the catch,
So again, it's perfectly possible that repealing net neutrality really does open things up
mm-hmm.
For some of these companies, or they just want to be on their best behavior now so they don't have the government coming back and telling them what to do later.
Right.
Who knows? We'll just have to wait and see on that. So opponents we mentioned before that opponents to net neutrality had say that net neutrality actually hurts innovation.
Right.
Mostly because it will put these smaller companies in a really difficult tax situation.
Right.
And I think I might be repeating myself here, but to use that as a reason to toss all of net neutrality out the window
is silly.
It is not enough. These regulations can be redesigned, can be amended, and that would seem like it would be the more reasonable solution. But when you just pick apart one part of something and say, "Oh, throw it out,"
mm-hmm.
That's the lazy solution. That's a blanket solution that doesn't necessarily incorporate the complexities of the issues itself.
Well, now that we've established kind of what net neutrality is and the pros and cons, what does this have to do with online gaming? How is this going to affect some of these games that are coming out that require more RAM and upload download because they're so big and beautiful?
So first thing is data caps.
Okay.
So data caps, right? So you know how in the good old days when you had your little flip phone, you had a data plan that said
you accidentally opened the web browser and you had to click out of it really fast.
Yeah, because you didn't want to go over your limit. Well, imagine that, but for video games.
Oh.
So not even necessarily playing them. Well, I think like 75%, something like that, of video games don't take that figure for granted, but the majority of video games are downloaded online now.
Right.
What if an ISP went to a company like, or who went to a third-party distributing service like Steam, for example?
Mm-hmm.
So Steam has a contract with this ISP, and in order for Steam, say they have to pay a little extra money now, in order to get the high-speed service that you're accustomed to on Steam.
Mm-hmm.
Now they have to charge for downloads and the amount of data that you're consuming.
Mm-hmm.
So it treats it as a resource now. So try and download Witcher, right? Costs $60, right? Let's say that hypothetical or Cyberpunk, right? Try and download Cyberpunk, $60, and it's a ginormous game,
right? As it's going to be.
Yeah. So, and you have a, maybe 50 gig, 100 gig data plan for what you have to pay for monthly, right? Or bi-monthly. And now, in addition to paying for the base copy of the game, you have to pay for, if you go over your data limit, the extra charges
for each game.
And you have to pay for having that data limit.
Ugh.
That again might not happen, but that's what this opens the gates for.
Yeah, that's the potential, is that all of a sudden, not only are you paying to have internet, you're paying for X amount of gigs, and then anything that you go over those gigs. And
so here's what's most likely going to happen, is these ISPs, which are mega companies.
Oh yeah.
What they're going to do is they're going to say, you know what, we'll let Steam live. We'll let it do its thing. We're not going to impede on it any.
Mm-hmm.
But here's what we're going to do, is we're going to make our own service. And guess what? You don't have to pay for downloads on this service. You can download for free. You have a 0 rating for your data
that makes sense.
If you use our service.
Yep.
And we're already seeing something like this. DirecTV. Just did some, or was it DirecTV? I think it was DirecTV.
They did what?
Maybe AT&T. So AT&T recently came out with this new streaming service.
Okay.
So they came out with their own version of Netflix, Hulu, Amazon Prime,
right?
And said, well, we're offer 0 rating on it, meaning it doesn't cost you to use that data. You just have to pay for the raw cost.
Yeah, but so I have T-Mobile, and I don't have to pay for any data that I consume via YouTube. They have a partnership with YouTube, and now we get Netflix for free because T-Mobile has a partnership with Netflix. So I think obviously there's two ways about going about it, right? Is that one of them could be, all right, we just make our own streaming sites, versus, all right, well, we're going to partner with specific companies that we know you want to use anyway.
Either way, it puts your competitors at a disadvantage.
Oh, absolutely.
Right? Because now if you're not YouTube and not Netflix, and you're trying to stream, and you have T-Mobile,
I'm still going to watch Hulu. So
I mean, these other services become less valuable.
Absolutely.
And obviously, in the short term, you're not going to see much change. But over the long term, some of these companies could be at a significant disadvantage because of that.
Exactly, yeah.
And so that, to get back to 0 rating, companies like Comcast and Verizon, they basically artificially eliminate their competition by charging these data rates on services they don't like, or services that are their competitors, or they can just make their own service. And because Steam is a third-party distributor, they don't have their own internet service provider, right? They have to contract up. These companies can just make their own services, and they could be worse, less innovative, garbage. But
that's fair.
If they're a hell of a lot cheaper, we're probably going to use it. We like the cheap stuff, as long as it's usable.
Well, I think the majority of Americans are just trying to get the best deal they can, the best bang for their buck. So, I mean, if that's what they have to do, then that's what they have to do.
Now, it's unlikely that they're going to try and do too much with the gaming industry, just because it's a little bit of rogue territory for them.
Well, and you don't want to piss off gamers. They get mad.
Yeah, but I'm thinking it's not too much of a stretch to go from a TV service to a streaming service.
Right.
It's a little bit more of a stretch to go from a online streaming service to a game distribution service.
Right.
So it's a little bit more of a different wheelhouse for them. So I am optimistic
they won't
that they won't crack down on some of these gaming sites.
Right.
But depending on even certain games, right, that have their own servers, you might have to pay extra now in addition to your Xbox Live Gold subscription.
Your internet subscription.
Right, and maybe game downloads are free, but playing online isn't. Right?
So I think the summary of this really is that nothing has happened yet. However, this is a dangerous situation because it opens up the potential for a lot of customer abuse.
Yes, and on the flip side with gaming too, because so we talked about how it affects the consumer, but what about gaming development?
Mm-hmm.
Right. So tons of what goes into gaming development is done online through cloud services, data sharing.
Mm-hmm.
All of that could be impacted if these ISPs start charging more for that service.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So if a gaming development becomes more expensive, it's going to become a slower process.
Right.
And with that note, most of the marketing around video games is online.
Right.
Right. So what if there's preferential treatment for certain ads, or maybe that's not the best way to go, but preferential treatment for certain companies and what websites they can show their ads on, which websites are fast, which websites are slow.
Exactly.
Right. Hypothetical, but these are the radical consequences or potential consequences that could happen without without an entity that has the power to prevent it.
Yeah, I just think, unfortunately, I think since we've overturned net neutrality, I think we just have to wait and see what happens. Are these companies going to be responsible and continue to keep the market open and free and even, or are they going to start taking advantage of their customers?
Yeah, and I guess to me, it's what's going to be more profitable in the long run, right?
Yeah.
In the long game, it's probably best to be nice to your consumers, for at least for now, while net neutrality is still relatively a sore subject for a lot of people.
Of course, right now it's important to be nice to your customers, but what about in a year when everyone forgets about it?
Yeah, it's perfectly possible that they just start going back down the same route of showing preferential treatment, zero rating, artificially eliminating competition. It's all possible, and that's frustrating. Now, of course, these corporations will have come out and said that it's a huge hypothetical to assume that the worst in businesses. And I say, well, not really, because there's anecdotal evidence of this happening,
right?
Of you doing this stuff when the rules were not in place, and that's why I'm not quite as confident that industries or ISPs are going to do the right thing here.
Well, that's why regulations exist in the first place, is because businesses at some point did something that was shitty, and they were like, all right, well, you can't do this anymore. All right.
Yeah, and I think net neutrality is a big thing internationally, and it's pretty well regarded as being a human right to have access to the internet, at least in Europe.
I agree with that.
Well, me too. And I look at the United States, and to view it as an information service seems ridiculous to me.
No, I think it's a utility.
Because 99% of Americans use it every day. Even people in prison use it. Right, like even the people you think probably wouldn't be on the computer probably use the internet at some point, whether it's their phone, whether it's a laptop, whether it's a tablet, whether you're at a library. Everything is so interconnected with the internet. So to not say or to say it's not a utility, it's not something that everyone needs to have access to, at least on paper.
It's disrespectful.
I don't know if I'll go that far. I'll just say it's. To me, at face value, it looks like corporations are getting greedy, or that this could be a money grab for them,
Mm-hmm.
or it could be exactly what they said it was, and that it's holding them back from being able to provide more services to more people because they'll have more money, more surplus of profit that they could by charging these big corporations that they can reinvest it back into infrastructure. That's one of their biggest claims, right? Is that they're going to be able to get back on their investment, so they're going to want to invest more.
Right.
That's perfectly possible, and I hope that's the case. I really do. I am just skeptical because the historical evidence does not suggest that's the pattern of behavior we're going to see.
Right.
But what are your thoughts? Do you have any questions about this or things that you think we need to know more about?
I mean, not really. I think we pretty extensively covered it. Like I said, it's going to come down to what happens, what these companies decide to do in the next, 12 to 18 to 24 months. What changes, what doesn't change. We just kind of have to wait and see.
Yeah, and I'm worried that this is going to be something that's just going to be forgotten, and then we're going to run into the same problem we had with Comcast and AT&T and companies like them that have just had lawsuits pile up against them for some really sketchy, corrupt shit.
Mm-hmm.
And we're just going to get right back to the point where public opinion is like, well, why is this still happening? And it's going to force net neutrality rules back into place. That's what's most likely going to happen if corporations go back down this greedy road.
Mm-hmm.
So that's their deterrent, is that you have a second chance here to do the right thing. But I don't see why the rules in themselves were so impeding. That was my biggest concern.
I don't think they were.
I don't see them as being that much of a burden on these corporations.
Mm-hmm.
I am also not an economist. I am also not a business business owner. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't know for sure. But what do you guys think? Is this net neutrality repeal a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Does it scare you? Does it leave you optimistic?
Do you have an opinion on it? What did you like? What did you not like? What do you think we missed? What are you excited about from the E3 announcements? Be sure to let us know. And if you like this video, be sure to like and subscribe. We put out new videos just about every Wednesday. We didn't miss last Wednesday, or two or three Wednesdays ago.
It'll be 2 Wednesdays ago by the time you guys.
Yeah, by the time you guys see this, because of some stuff that was going on. But just about every Wednesday, we try and put a video out. We appreciate you joining us, and once again, have an amazing day.
Bye, guys.